Right, just wanted to do a quick video just reviewing my favourite top 10 books on UFOs. I've loved the subject all my life, and I just wanted to do a quick review of my 10 favourite books on the subject. Just bear in mind, these aren't necessarily the best books on UFOs, they're just my personal favourites. I'll give you a quick reason why they're my favourites, and I'll go from 10 to 1. So here we go. Number 1 is Beyond Top Secret by Timothy Good. The reason it's my favourite is because it's packed with information. It's a pretty big book. It's an old book. The only problem with it is, for a lot of people, they'll find it hard work. If you're new to the subject, you're going to find it really like a chore to read it. You're not going to particularly enjoy it. But if you want to build up a lot of knowledge on the subject, that's a great book to get started with. So that's at number 10, and I think maybe a bit dated now, but that's probably the only problem with it, and it's a bit serious, this one. But all in all, not a bad book. Number 9 is The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis, and this one's by Paul Hellyer, who was the ex-Canadian Minister of Defence. It's not a UFO book, but it covers some of the UFO subject. So a lot of people might say, well, it's not a UFO book, why is it in your top 10? Because the guy that wrote the book is an advocate for UFOs. He says he believes it's real. He's had a lot of people come to him to tell him it's real. Talks about that in his book, covers a lot of subjects, mainly about banking and the corruption involved in that, but it does cover the UFO subject. So number 9, The Money Mafia, Paul Hellyer, pretty good one. And then number 8 is Bruce Maccabee's The FBI CIA UFO Connection. I've got this geezer on my Facebook. He's a top man, he's a good researcher. It's Bruce Maccabee. He does a really good job of just covering the subject of UFOs and the CIA and FBI's involvement in investigating it and covering it up. It's quite a light-hearted book as well, so it's not totally serious. It's got a good sense of humour. So I highly recommend this book. It's a really good book. Number 7, The Whole Perspective. And as you can see, it's a massive book. And it was expensive, this one. I think it was about £35 I paid for this. But it's my favourite, one of my favourite UFO encounters, cases, whatever you want to say it. Because it's Rendlesham Forest. He was the colonel and one of the main witnesses. And it's just his take on what happened. It's a good book. Little big, as you can probably tell, but full of colour pictures, articles, evidence. Really good, fascinating book. So I highly recommend that one, but it's pricey. Right then, what we're on there. Number 6 is, could not get Richard Dolan in there, UFOs and the National Security State. This one's the first edition between 1941 and 1973. Again, it's another big book, and the writing's really small, and it covers everything you can think of involving military encounters, government encounters, civilian encounters, and it's just a really good overall record of what's happened between that time period, between 1941 and 1973. Great book, but it can sometimes feel a bit of a chore reading it just because it's so big. So again, if you're looking for a book that's, I would say, if you don't want to be seriously investigating UFOs, I'd avoid it. If you're really interested in the subject, I'd buy that. And so of course, number 5 is going to be his follow-up book, UFOs in the National Security State, Volume 2. This one's covering between 1973 to 1991. Again, a massive book, and it's not filled out with pictures or anything like that. It's a lot of, feels like it's a lot of work to read it. It's well worth reading if you're interested in the subject and you want to see the serious evidence to the topic. But like again, I say again, it's not an easy read. It can feel like a chore sometimes, but because I've been into the subject all my life, I've managed to plough my way through it eventually. So, really good book, not a bad price, and it's a great follow-up to his first edition. Right, number 4. It's Richard Dolan again. Yeah. Just a great overall cover of, this is just covering everything you can think of, from crop circles, abductions, ancient aliens, science, all the encounters, anything you can think of is in this book. It covers pretty much everything. And it's just good if you're open-minded and some things you might say, no, I don't think that's anything to do with UFOs, or some things you think, oh, I never thought of that. So overall, really good book, and it's more light-hearted than his first 2, which are great books, but I just think that one's better for a person that's, if you was trying to introduce someone into the subject and you was going to offer them a Richard Dolan book, you'd start with that one because it's not so serious and it's easier to read for them. So another great book by Mr. Dolan. Number 3 is Robert Salaz's Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon. It's not a very big book, this one. Not a very big book at all, but he was involved in an encounter, I think it's over Malmstrom Airport. He was a nuclear operator, so he was in charge of nuclear weapons. There was one come over his site, shut down his nukes. I think it was 10 nukes got shut down. And the people above, on the top side, were seeing it. They're seeing the UFO at the same time. The nukes went out. So it's a book not just covering that. It does cover that, but it's covering the whole how the government would instigate a cover-up inside like military installations and inside government. So really good book. It's not the biggest book, but don't be forward, it's a good book. Really like that one. Number 2, which is a lot of people's number 1, Leslie Kane's UFOs, Generals, Pilots, Government Officials Go on the Record. Brilliant book. That's probably the one book if you want to introduce someone to the topic and not look like a nutcase. That's probably the best book because it's serious investigation. It's not the biggest book, as you can see. It's not a massive book, but it covers so many good encounters that, and eyewitnesses in it are unreal. Like, she's got Air Force pilots, she's got people from the government. John Podesta does the foreword, Fife Symington. She's got Nick Pope from the Ministry of Defence in England. So she's got some real high caliber people giving their testimony in this book and giving it a serious investigation. And that really, to me, it's not number 1 because there's a book I prefer more for personal reasons, but if you were going to give someone a book on the subject that's new to it and sceptical, that is the best book. So highly, 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 highly recommend that. And she's a lovely girl. And number 1 is Terry Hansen, The Missing Times. A lot of people's never have heard of this book. The reason it's at number 1 is because I've always had an interest in propaganda, especially to do with, I've always wondered if there were a government cover-up to do with UFOs or any other subject, I've always wondered how or why it would happen. This book uses World War II, real provable things that happened in World War II, about how the government and the media lied to manipulate the news, influence the news, change people's beliefs on what was happening in certain wars. And it shows you how that is used to then do the same thing for the UFO subject, how they can manipulate the news, make things that happened seem like they didn't, make things that didn't happen seem like they did. and it's so just about propaganda and creating the environment where it's sometimes like you can't, unless you've read a book, it's hard to explain how good it is. It's so good. Honestly, I can't recommend this book more. This is like the best book on the subject by a mile. Oh, and it's just brilliant. But sadly, Terry Hanson's not done another because he's passed away a while ago. But this is a great UFO book. So there's my top 10. If you've got other books you think are better for the subject, then comment below and leave me a like.